The air inside the station tasted of iron and dust, heavy with the shuffle of hundreds of feet moving toward somewhere they needed to be. Voices tangled overhead, announcements, laughter, arguments, the kind of noise that makes you feel both swallowed and invisible. I stood still. My fingers clutched the handle of a small suitcase so tightly that the skin along my knuckles whitened. The leather strap of a red scarf slipped loose from my wrist, its edge brushing against the dirty floor, catching the light of the departure board that kept flickering like it was nervous too. I didn't look at the trains. I didn't look at the doors opening and closing like mouth-swallowing strangers. My eyes followed one man walking through the crowd. His shoulders, broad and proud, were too easy to recognize. Even now, even after everything. His laughter carried back to me, easy and bright, bouncing against the tiled walls. It was the same laugh he had used when he pulled me close under library lamps, when he whispered promises against my neck. The same laugh he let fall into the air just before he ruined me. My hand trembled at my side. I pressed it hard against the suitcase to steady it, but the shaking wouldn't stop. The cracked face of the old watch on my wrist ticked out of rhythm, like it too remembered. "You don't get to take this moment from me," I whispered, so low it was swallowed by the station's chaos. No one heard, but the words tasted bitter and final on my tongue. I stepped back, trying to anchor myself against a cold pillar. My hair lifted slightly in the wind that swept in with each opening of the doors. For a moment, it felt like the whole world was breathing down my neck. My chest tightened as he turned his head just enough that his profile caught the dim light. Sharp jaw. That stubborn tilt of his chin. The memory of his mouth curling in that cruel half-smile. He didn't see me. Or maybe he pretended not to. My suitcase felt heavier, as though the weight inside was pulling me deeper into the tiled floor. The envelope in its side pocket burned against the fabric, demanding to be remembered. Demanding to be delivered. I thought about graduation. The flash of cameras, the way the stage lights melted the air into something too hot to breathe. How my diploma had nearly slipped from my hands because my fingers were already shaking when he said it, when he chose to stand there, in front of everyone, and leave me like I was nothing more than a joke in his mouth. The echo of that moment still rings in me. Loud. Endless. I closed my eyes for only a breath. His voice again, closer this time, made me open them. He was talking to someone else, careless, his words coated in that same confidence that used to undo me. I wanted to walk toward him. I wanted to vanish. I wanted to rip the cracked watch from my wrist and hurl it across the marble floor just to stop the ticking. But instead, I gripped the suitcase and took a step forward. The scarf slipped fully from my wrist now, tumbling to the ground in slow motion, a streak of red against the gray. No one else noticed. He didn't notice. I bent slowly, picking it up with hands that still shook, and when I straightened, my eyes met his across the crowd. He froze mid-sentence. And for one raw, suspended second, the entire station seemed to hold its breath. The scarf twisted in my hand as if it were alive, as if it knew the truth buried inside the suitcase. The red fabric clung to my palm like a pulse. I wrapped it tight, maybe too tight, the way I used to when I was a girl waiting on the edge of a cold train platform for my father to come home. He always carried the same worn canvas bag, its corners rubbed raw from years of travel. "A bag is never just a bag," he used to say, kneeling to my level, his breath tinged with cigarettes and rain. "It holds your story. Even the parts no one else will ever read." Back then, I believed him. Tonight, standing in this station with my cracked watch ticking too fast and my small suitcase biting into my palm, I wondered if he knew how right he'd been. My bag carried more than clothes. More than paper. It carried the end of something and the beginning of something I wasn't sure I was brave enough to face. I shifted my weight and let my eyes drift over the crowd. A woman in a long coat lifted her child into her arms, spinning him until his laughter spilled like bells into the air. A man ran to a girl who waited with flowers, and the way their bodies collided, messy, desperate, unashamed, was almost too much to watch. I turned away, my chest tight. No arms waited for me here. No reunion. Only the sound of trains leaving without asking if I was ready. My stomach clenched. The memory of that graduation stage still clung to me like wet clothes. His voice rising over the crowd. The sting of humiliation when people turned their heads, whispered, some even laughed. The weight of the diploma paper cutting into my skin while I tried not to cry. I had fought too long for that paper, working nights, swallowing loneliness, counting every coin in a jar that was never full enough. I'd done it alone. He had promised he would never let me feel that kind of aloneness again. And then he proved himself a liar with an audience. My hand brushed over the envelope tucked inside the suitcase's pocket. I felt the sharp edge against my fingertips, a reminder that words could be heavier than stone if sealed and delivered at the right time. I wanted to breathe, but the air in the station had thickened. That was when I felt it, a pair of eyes on me. Not his. Someone else. Across the platform, a stranger leaned against the far wall. His coat was dark, collar turned up, face half-shadowed by the yellow lights overhead. He wasn't moving, not even pretending to check the departure boards or his phone like the others. He was just watching. I didn't know why, but his silence felt intentional, as if he was waiting for me to do something I hadn't yet done. A chill ran down my arms. I gripped the scarf tighter, almost wishing the red fabric could shield me from whatever this was. The stranger didn't look away. I shifted, pretending to study the clock hanging over the gates, its second hand twitching forward with a stubborn rhythm. My cracked watch ticked louder in answer, as if mocking me. I thought about leaving, about dragging my suitcase onto the nearest train, disappearing before either of them noticed. But my feet wouldn't move. Instead, I stood there, frozen between the memory of my father's words and the ghost of that graduation day, between the envelope waiting in the suitcase and the eyes of a stranger holding me still. The loudspeaker crackled overhead, announcing a delay, the voice distorted but clear enough. Final boarding in 10 minutes. 10 minutes. The scarf slipped again, unraveling slightly in my hand, its red edge brushing my wrist like a warning. I lifted my gaze and found the stranger still watching, his expression unreadable. Not cruel. Not kind. Something in between, a question carved into his silence. For the first time, he moved. Just a tilt of the head. Just enough to make me wonder if I was supposed to answer. And in that suspended moment, my breath caught, my lips parting, not in goodbye, not in anger, but in something dangerously close to hesitation. The station lights flickered once, and the ceiling groaned as though the building itself was tired of carrying so many unspoken stories. My scarf loosened in my grip, and for a fleeting second, I considered leaving it behind, like a red thread cut clean from everything that bound me here. But then the stranger shifted, and my attention was pulled back to him. His shoes caught my eye first. Worn leather, the kind that had once been polished but now sagged at the seams, darkened by water and years of walking places no one else wanted to go. They didn't belong to a man who traveled for leisure. They belonged to someone who carried weight the way I did, quietly, invisibly. A gust of air swept through the station doors, dragging in the smell of rain. My hair whipped against my cheeks, and with it, the memory of that night after graduation. The way I walked home in the storm with mascara bleeding into my collar, the diploma pressed against my chest, trying to keep both it and myself from being ruined. When I looked back, the stranger had pulled something from his coat pocket. Not a phone. Not a ticket. A small, folded photo, its edges creased like it had lived in that pocket longer than anything else. He didn't look at it long, just a glance, like the glance I give the cracked watch when I need reminding of time I can't get back. He slid it away before anyone else could see. But I had seen. A child's face, maybe. Or a woman's. It was too quick, too shadowed, but the shape of love was there. And loss. Something inside me tightened. He was a mirror I didn't ask for. A reflection of carrying grief in silence, of walking into stations and leaving pieces of yourself behind without ceremony. The rain outside hit harder now, echoing against the high glass windows of the station. The thunder rolled low, like a warning, like the sky itself was holding its breath with me. My suitcase handle dug into my palm. I needed to move. My train wouldn't wait forever, and neither would the envelope inside. Yet my feet stayed still, as if the storm outside had rooted me here. I told myself it was foolish standing in the gaze of a stranger when the man who had broken me was only a few steps away, still laughing, still unpunished. And yet, it was easier to face this silent man's eyes than the ones I once loved. Was it fate pulling me toward him? Or was it another trick, another manipulation waiting to bloom? My chest rose sharply, and I pressed a hand against it as though I could steady the thunder building inside me. The loudspeaker crackled again, calling for last boarding. My train. My escape. And still, my body didn't move. The stranger's head tilted once more, a fraction of an invitation or maybe a warning. I couldn't tell. I noticed then the faint scar that cut across his jawline, a pale thread barely visible under the dim lights. He had been broken once too. Maybe more than once. Our eyes caught across the storm of footsteps and announcements, and for a moment it felt like the station emptied itself just for us. The scarf slipped from my hand again, pooling red against the gray floor. Neither of us bent to pick it up. I wanted to ask him who he was, why he was watching me, whether he carried his own envelope, sealed tight with secrets. But my voice refused to rise. The thunder outside cracked like the sky splitting open, and in that violent sound, I thought I saw his lips curve, not into a smile, not into cruelty, but into something undecipherable. My suitcase trembled at my side, the envelope inside pressing against the fabric, as if it too wanted to escape. The board above me flickered once more, my train number blinking, urging me toward a choice. And still I stood in hesitation, caught between departure and disclosure, between a stranger's silence and the unfinished war burning in my chest. The scarf lay abandoned at my feet. The station clock struck the hour, its chime dull against the roar of the storm outside. My breath felt uneven, as though the sound had landed inside my chest and cracked something open. The crowd thinned as the last boarding call echoed overhead, names of cities spilling from the loudspeaker like doors closing one by one. I bent to grab my suitcase, ready to run, to vanish, but my body betrayed me. My knees softened, trembling. For a moment I thought I might collapse right there on the cold floor. I pressed a palm to the pillar, forcing myself upright, forcing the air into my lungs. Just leave, I told myself. Don't look back. But my head turned anyway. One last look. And there he was, my husband, or whatever he was now. His back to me, his arm around someone else, the kind of casual intimacy that once belonged to me. The sight made my throat close, my vision blur. I nearly stumbled forward, but I swallowed the sound that clawed at my mouth. No one would see me break again. Not here. Not twice. I gripped the suitcase so hard the handle burned my palm. I wanted to scream, to fling the envelope across the polished floor so it would explode at his feet like a flare. But I stayed still, trembling in silence. The hush broke with a shuffle behind me. The scarf. My scarf. The stranger bent down and lifted it from the ground, holding it in his hand as if it were something fragile, not just fabric stained with my restless grip. He didn't walk toward me. He simply stood there, the red cloth dangling from his fingers, catching the station light like a drop of fire refusing to be extinguished. For the first time, his voice broke the silence. Low. Rough. Almost like the storm itself had spoken through him. Some people carry more than just bags, he said, eyes not leaving mine. They carry silence. The words threaded into me, quiet and devastating. My chest tightened. Did he see through me that easily, or was he talking about himself? A couple brushed past us then, whispering under their breath. The woman's glance flicked from me to him, her mouth curling, not cruel exactly but marked with judgment, the kind strangers wear when they think they've understood your story from a single frame. I dropped my gaze to the floor. Shame, heat, defiance, all tangled in me until I couldn't breathe. When I looked up again, the scarf was still in his hand. He stepped closer, not enough to bridge the distance, but enough that I could see the water dripping from his worn shoes, the faint tremor in the hand that held my scarf. I began, my voice cracking. But the words died in my throat. He tilted his head slightly, the same unreadable expression from before. Not pity. Not demand. Something else. Something that made me both want to step closer and run. Behind me, the laughter of my husband rang again, louder, drawing looks from others nearby. A group of students snickered softly, the way they had that day at graduation, when I stood humiliated with my diploma slipping in my grip. The sound cut through me, reopening the wound like it had never healed. The envelope inside my suitcase felt like it was burning, pressing against the fabric, desperate to be released. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to meet the stranger's eyes. "You don't know me," I whispered. The scarf tightened in his hand. His lips parted as though to answer, but no words came. Only silence stretched between us, thick and unbearable. The loudspeaker announced again, "Final call." My train was leaving. My escape, my chance, my end. I should have walked away. I should have turned my back and boarded. Instead, I froze. My hand hovered on the suitcase handle, my feet refusing to move. The scarf still hung in his grip, red and alive, the only thing tethering me to this unbearable moment. And when the train's whistle split the air, I did the one thing I had promised myself I wouldn't. I hesitated. The train pulled out with a hollow scream, steel on steel. I should have been on it. Instead, I stood in the emptied station, my chest heaving, the scarf still hanging between us like a tether neither of us had agreed to. The stranger let the silence linger, and then, almost reluctantly, he stepped forward. He placed the scarf into my trembling hands. His fingers brushed mine only for a breath, but it was enough to send a chill up my arm. "Some things," he said, his voice quiet as thunder rolling away, "don't belong to us. We only carry them until we find where they're meant to rest." The words burrowed deep, striking something I didn't want touched. I wanted to demand what he meant, but my throat felt raw. My cracked watch ticked louder, and for a heartbeat, the sound looped back to my father's voice. "A bag is never just a bag. It holds your story." My suitcase. The envelope. My silence. The scarf tightened in my palm, and then I saw it. His eyes flicked down toward the red fabric, but not with the recognition of a stranger. His jaw clenched. His gaze lingered like it hurt to look. "You know it," I whispered, more statement than question. He looked away. For the first time since I noticed him, he looked away. His silence was answer enough. Before I could press him, a voice broke through the station. One of the staff, ushering stragglers toward the exit. She glanced at me, then at the stranger, and the way her brows knit together carried a quiet judgment that burned hotter than words. I grabbed the suitcase handle, pulling it close like a shield, and followed the current of bodies out. The rain outside struck hard, blurring the streetlights into long streaks of gold and red. I kept walking fast, the scarf clutched to my chest, but the sound of footsteps behind me told me he hadn't left either. I stopped under the dripping awning of a cafe, the kind that looked too warm and alive for the storm. I thought he would pass me by. He didn't. Instead, he stood near, shaking the rain from his coat. His movements were sharp, efficient, like a man used to cleaning himself of storms. When his wallet slipped from his pocket, I bent instinctively, catching it before it hit the wet ground. That's when I saw it, tucked inside the transparent sleeve, behind the worn leather. The photo. Not just any photo. The girl in it wore my scarf. My scarf, bright and red, wrapped around her neck, her smile so full it hurt to look at. I froze. The scarf in my hand grew heavier, unbearable. He noticed, too late, and reached for the wallet, but I held it a fraction longer. Our eyes collided. "Who is she?" My voice shook. He didn't answer. His silence was a storm in itself. But I knew. I didn't need him to say it. The scarf wasn't mine anymore. It had never really been. It had belonged to her. To his daughter. My knees almost gave out, the weight of it crushing. I wanted to throw it back at him, scream that I didn't want to carry anyone else's ghost when I could barely carry my own. But my hands refused to let go. The watch on my wrist ticked on, cruelly steady. It holds your story, my father's voice echoed again. Only now it wasn't just mine. I turned away, clutching the scarf, the envelope, the suitcase. My silence was no longer enough. I had reached the point of no return. Inside the cafe, the air was warm, blurred with voices and clinking cups. I pushed through the door, dripping rain onto the tiled floor, my pulse loud in my ears. The stranger followed, but slower, keeping distance. And then I saw him. My husband. Sitting at a corner table. Dry. Smiling. Papers spread before him, the same company letterhead as the one in the job application I had submitted only days ago. The company I had prayed would save me. My breath caught. The envelope in my suitcase felt like it was burning through the leather. I stood there, shaking, the storm clinging to me, every eye in the cafe lifting in quiet judgment. And then I stepped forward, into the room that would change everything. The cafe hummed with low voices, silverware scraping porcelain, rain rattling the windows like impatient knuckles. I stood just inside the door, water dripping from my hair onto the tiled floor, the suitcase at my side, the red scarf heavy in my fist. He, my husband, looked up. His eyes widened, then narrowed, his mouth curving into that cruel half-smile I knew too well. Papers lay scattered before him, their letterhead glowing under the dim lamp. My letterhead. My future, waiting on the table between coffee cups. "Didn't expect you here," he said, voice pitched so others could hear. He liked that, performing, making the whole room complicit. "Still following me around?" Laughter, small and sharp, leaked from a nearby table. Quiet judgment again, strangers stitching stories from scraps. My cheeks burned, but this time, I didn't bow under it. My hand slipped to the suitcase pocket, fingertips grazing the envelope's edge. The cracked watch on my wrist ticked wildly, its rhythm breaking against my pulse. "You once said," I whispered, my voice steadier than I felt, "that you'd never let me stand alone." He leaned back, smug, unbothered. "And yet, look at you. Alone. Always alone." The scarf trembled in my hand. Before I could speak again, another voice cut through. "Not alone." The stranger. He stood at the doorway now, rain still clinging to him, his presence pulling the cafe into silence. His eyes didn't leave mine, though his words were aimed at no one. Something shifted in the air. My husband frowned, uneasy. The stranger moved closer, placing something on the table between us. The photograph. The girl's face shining in the frozen light of a moment long gone, the red scarf bright around her neck. My breath caught. The scarf in my hand grew unbearably heavy, as though it wanted to fall back where it once belonged. "She carried this," he said softly, nodding at the fabric. "She carried it until the end. Now it's yours." His words weren't gift, they were burden. The scarf wasn't just memory anymore. It was inheritance. It was silence and story and unfinished grief. I understood then. He hadn't followed me to rescue me. He had chosen me because I reminded him of her. Not for love. Not for desire. But because in my shaking hands, in my stubborn silence, he saw a ghost. The cafe's walls pressed in. My husband sneered, glancing between us, thinking he'd won. "What is this?" he demanded. "Some pathetic replacement game?" I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled the envelope from the suitcase. My fingers hesitated only once before I slid it across the table toward him. Its weight thudded against the papers, startling him. His smirk faltered. "What's this?" he asked. "My silence," I said. My voice was low, but it carried. "And the last thing you'll ever take from me." He tore it open, eyes darting over the contents, his face draining as he read. The cafe leaned in with their stares, hungry for drama, but I didn't need to watch his collapse. I had already let him go. I set the scarf on the table beside the photo, the two objects finally reunited. My hands shook as I released them, but it felt like a rebirth, like laying something to rest. The watch on my wrist ticked on, steady now, no longer mocking. The stranger's eyes met mine, unreadable, heavy with a gratitude he'd never voice. He didn't reach for me. He didn't need to. His silence said enough. I had given back what was never mine to carry. I turned toward the door, suitcase in hand, the weight inside finally lighter. Outside, the rain had eased. The station lights glowed faintly through the fog, the same place I had once stood frozen, clutching my bag, choking on humiliation. Only now my role had shifted. I wasn't waiting. I was leaving. As the cafe door swung shut behind me, I caught the faintest echo of my father's voice. A bag is never just a bag. It holds your story. This time I carried only mine. And I didn't look back.